Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. Each year, the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society puts out its list of gold medal winning plants. Usually, these plants are chosen for their adaptability to the mid-Atlantic region of the United States. This year, though, the chosen plants have a much wider range of possible success, including USDA Zone 9 and possibly Zone 10, all the way down to USDA Zone 3. So listen closely, Los Angeles, San Diego, Tampa, and Orlando. We just might have an intriguing new plant for you to try. And by the way, you too, Bismarck and Fargo. Also, now is the time in warmer places of the nation to get outside and thin the fruit from many of your deciduous fruit trees as the fruit is beginning to form right after flowering. Why is that so important? We'll tell you. It's all in episode 323 of today's Garden Basics with Farmer Fred. It's gold medal plant winners and why you should thin the fruit on your fruit trees now. We're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon jungle in suburban Purgatory. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, and we're brought to you today by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Let's go. Well, the 2024 gold medal plant winners are out. The Pennsylvania Horticultural Society has its list of plants that are now available to the public through most garden retailers. The gold medal plant program was created by the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society back in 1979 to celebrate and showcase beautiful, easy-to-grow plant species that are ideal for home gardening. A committee of horticulture experts convenes to assess trees and shrubs and perennials on various criteria, including their suitability for home gardens, primarily for the mid-Atlantic region. But a lot of these plants that are on the gold medal list have a much wider territory than just, say, zones 4 through 8. They're known for their ease of cultivation, ready commercial availability, wildlife value, weather tolerance, and pest resistance. We are talking with Andrew Bunting. He is the Vice President of Horticulture for the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. Andrew, have you recovered from the Philadelphia Flower Show yet?
Yeah, I think so. I could probably use a little vacation, but, it's also spring, so no time for resting at this point.
How did the show go?
It was good. It was an improvement on the previous year. We had lots of crowds, which we enjoy, lots of bus tours. Our numbers were where we wanted them to be. So, kind of post-COVID, we're still kind of rebuilding our approach, but things are on track.
At the show, what was the exhibit or the plants that garnered the most interest as you wandered through the show?
I would say, so we do a main entrance garden every year, and this is designed and installed by the Horticultural Society. And that featured our biggest indoor water display to date. So the biggest pond that we've ever had indoors at the flower show is actually a series of several rectilinear ponds, and it was surrounded by thousands of bulbs. So that was heavy on the flowers, and the visitors seemed to really enjoy the water in combination with the flowers. Best of show in the landscape division was Apiary Studio, which is a little boutique design build firm here in Philadelphia and Germantown. And they focused on kind of what you might see along the roadside in anywhere North America. And that really focused on native plants. As well did Kelly Norris's display. He's a designer from Des Moines, Iowa. His focus was also on native plants. And it was interesting. The public, even though these aren't your real super showy plants, that they really resonated with the public and turned out to be two of the most popular exhibits.
You could take your roadside plant tour on a roadside tour, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
All right. That sounds great. All right. Let's talk about some of these gold medal plants. You have 6 of them this year. The one that kind of got my interest was the edible one, the asparagus millennium.
Yes. So this is the first year that we've featured a hardy edible. And, a good part of what PHS does is increasing people's access to fresh food, sharing produce, growing produce. So we thought it was important for us to add a category to the gold medal plants. So we added an edible category. And so we also added a couple experts to the panel who really their knowledge base is really in the edibles. So the way a plant makes it to the list is it has to be nominated. Then the committee, we do a survey monkey survey, and whichever ones kind of go to the top of the list, this being one of them, are then considered against other kind of top nominees. And so asparagus millennium got in it. It's an asparagus that is really good for production, good taste, easy to grow. I think in general, asparagus is relatively easy to grow. It's a crop that people don't often grow because it takes a while for it to mature and get to a state where you can have an appreciable harvest.
And it has a wide range, too. It's not just for the mid-Atlantic area.
Almost anywhere in the United States.
Even though it was developed in Canada.
Right. It's pretty hardy, obviously. But yeah, I think you can grow it almost in every state in the United States.
This millennium asparagus, too, is primarily male plants. And it didn't dawn on me until I was reading about it. And it makes sense. A male plant is going to send most of its energy into developing asparagus shoots, for example, instead of berries, which subtracts from the energy. So you're going to get more of a harvest out of this.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, people don't think about asparagus much as to what it actually is. What you're eating are the stems before they turn into kind of the ferny leafy growth. But then they also do produce, as you said, a berry. So if it's a female plant, the production or the energy is going to go into the berry and not into so much the stem production.
Yeah, generally, when it comes to growing asparagus, you grow it and harvest it until the spears are thinner than a pencil.
Right.
And sometimes that can happen after the first crop or two. But with millennium, you're going to get more.
That's right.
I noticed that the researchers in Michigan basically said millennium might be slower to attain high yields when compared to the more well-known Jersey and Jersey Giant varieties. But they later showed superior and heavy yields over a 15-year lifespan, and planting showed greater vigor and survival.
Yep, that's true.
One of the reasons, I think, for its survival in colder climates is the fact it goes dormant sooner in the fall, which can protect it more during really cold winters. And another benefit of going dormant earlier, it's easier to control a pest like the asparagus beetle because they don't have any place to overwinter.
Right. If it goes dormant earlier, it's less vulnerable to sudden drops in cold temperatures in the fall. And you probably saw on the press release, it's, hardy to USDA Zone 3, which is like, Canada and North Dakota and places like that.
And the University of North Dakota did chime in about the millennium, and they really like it here with a sort of a snotty remark about California. But being that my mother's family's from North Dakota, I'll allow this one. North Dakota University says hybrids developed in California do not have the hardiness and vigor we need in North Dakota.
Yeah, that could be true. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. So the millennium, though, solves that problem. So that.
Yep.
And it's widely available. Can you grow it from seed?
I think you'd have to grow it from, vegetative starts, because from seed, it probably would not come genetically true.
Okay. All right. So be looking for millennium asparagus. If one of your bugaboos about asparagus is the fact that's a lot of work for 1 or 2 harvests, you might want to try the millennium. But I still think that asparagus is sort of a back 40 crop because the ferns that you mentioned pop up after when the spears are allowed to grow out. This can get 3 to 5 feet tall, and you don't really want that at the front of your garden.
No. I have asparagus kind of at the end of my vegetable garden, and some of the shoots do go into the kind of leafy form, and I actually enjoy that texture in the garden.
Another of your 2024 Pennsylvania Horticultural Society gold medal plants is a anise tree, or so it smells like licorice, I guess. And this one is Elysium woodland ruby.
Yeah, so the Elysiums are a plant that, say, 15 years ago, hardly anybody knew about them. There's some Mexican natives, but this one is derived from the Florida native, and it's a broad-leaved evergreen that reaches 5 to 10 feet tall. As you said, the leaves smell like anise, and because of that, the deer don't like them. Like, this is truly a deer-resistant shrub. There aren't many plants you can make that claim with, but Elysium woodland ruby is one of them. And then it also has kind of sporadically early summer and through the fall, it produces these interesting kind of spider-like flowers with reddish strap-like flowers. So that's adds to the ornament of this plant. And I have Elysiums at home. I have different cultivars, and they're also very tolerant of dry shade. So at the back of my property, I have a big tall row of Norway spruces, and at the base of them, it's extremely dry, but Elysiums seem to be pretty tolerant of those conditions.
But I imagine with a little bit of moist soil, though, it does probably perform highly.
Yeah, a little bit of moisture and actually a little bit of sunlight, like where I have them, is also pretty shady. And still, they're pretty good performers. But yeah, a little bit more moisture and a little bit more sunlight, and they'll do even better.
The University of North Carolina, their Extension Gardener program, has this warning about the Elysium woodland ruby. It says this plant has high severity poison characteristics.
Maybe the leaves are poisonous. Maybe that's why deer don't eat them. I haven't heard about any other aspects of this, being of concern to planting. Like, if the leaves are poisonous or if the flowers are poisonous, they're not as if something would, like a human would eat them for any reason. So, I wonder what the poisonous aspect is and what the concern might be.
The University of North Carolina talks about its fruits, leaves, and seeds being the poisonous part, and the poison toxic principle, and I'm going to mangle this name, sesquiterpene lactones. And I have no idea what that is. But,
right.
I grew up around oleanders and I lived.
Exactly. And I grow castor beans in my backyard, which produce, the deadly poison ricin, and have never had an issue.
And it's one of the most gorgeous plants around, too. Yeah, the castor bean plant is just absolutely fabulous. My neighbor has one growing out front, and I just want to go over there and take some cuttings of it. I just have no place to put it, that's all.
Yeah. I think that, there's lots of poisonous plants that we grow, things like foxglove and monkshood is, very poisonous, but unless people or pets ingest the leaves or fruits or flowers, then they're essentially not an issue to grow in a cultivated garden. And
gardeners should know the eating habits of their pets and children and would avoid such plants.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
All right. Another plant on the gold medal list is one that I've been hearing about from listeners to the podcast, and they really like it. It's a magnolia called Genie, Genie, like Genie in the bottle. Yeah. And this particular magnolia, I guess, is a cross of a Solangiana, a saucer magnolia.
Yeah, its real claim to fame is that it's fairly diminutive in its stature. It only gets about 12 feet tall at maturity. It does have, Solangiana or kind of saucer magnolia-like flowers. However, they're a pretty intense, deep, dark purple. So, that's a little bit of a departure from your typical saucer magnolias. But for somebody who's looking for something that has strong kind of magnolia-like flower power, but doesn't have the room for some of these bigger flowering magnolias, then Genie is perfect. It would be perfect for like a courtyard garden, perfect for a city dweller that maybe has a small backyard, but still wants to have magnolia. Then, this is a good choice.
I know that Monrovia grows that plant here in California, and they say that it's good from USDA zones 4 through 9. And I've heard enough from enough people in USDA zone 9 that I know it does look fabulous here as well. And like you say, it is diminutive, maybe 10 to 13 feet tall and 5 feet wide.
Yeah. I would say it has a broad range as far as hardiness. In places like, I have a colleague that lives in Tallahassee, Florida, that grows a lot of these magnolias, or like in California, they'll just bloom earlier. So, typical magnolia season in Tallahassee is like, January, February. And I know the same is true in Southern California. So in those regions, you'll get early bloom, while say here or in Boston or Chicago, magnolia bloom season with like Genie is probably going to be more mid-April, late April, even early May, depending on how far north you live.
And like a true saucer magnolia, you see the flowers before the leaves come out, which makes it a fabulous show in late winter or early spring. It's like a deep maroon purple bud opening to lightly fragrant pink flowers on those bare branches.
Yeah, I think it'll have the flower power of, the saucer magnolia, which in my opinion is the best of the magnolias. But this has all that, but on just a smaller plant. All
right. By the way, we will have more information about these plants in today's show notes, and this week's Beyond the Garden Basic newsletter, which comes out Friday. We'll go into more detail about these plants as well to give you a better understanding of what they are and who they're for. Another plant on the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society's gold medal plant list for 2024 is a buttonbush shrub called Sugar Shack, I guess not to be confused with the Jimmy Gilmer and Fireballs hit song of 1963.
Yeah, so this I think is a great one to have on the list. I think anytime we can have a native plant, that's a benefit. If people are familiar with a buttonbush, you'll find it all throughout the east and southeast, often growing in standing water. So not only is it a good native, it's a good plant for marshy or wet areas in the yard. So there aren't many plants that can actually thrive in actual standing water. This is one of them. It's also, it produces these really interesting white kind of globe-like or orb-like flowers that are fragrant, great for attracting pollinators, especially butterflies. It's a real magnet for swallowtail butterflies, monarchs, etc. Also really hardy, so this could grow anywhere on the East Coast, but also into the Midwest and upper Midwest as well. And then it gets a decent fall color, kind of burgundy fall color also.
And like you say, it does need a wet environment to grow best.
Yeah, it doesn't have to have, it can grow in like just kind of marshy areas, standing water, like on the edge of a pond or lake, but it can also grow in just normal garden soils as well. So it's not incumbent that there be heavy moisture for it to thrive.
It is on the proven winners plant list, this Sugar Shack buttonbush. And of course, being that they're in the business of selling plants, they claim the hardiness zones go from zone 4 through zone 10. I don't know about that.
I could see it definitely going into northern to central Florida, which would be zone 10. I think that it does have good heat tolerance. So I wouldn't see an issue with it, growing all throughout the lower coastal plain of the southeastern United States. It's interesting you mentioned proven winners. I was giving a lecture just maybe 10 days ago in Wooster, Ohio, and one of the speakers was Tim Wood, who's from Spring Meadow Nurseries, and they're the ones who produce all the woody plants, the hardy woody plants, shrubs in particular, for the Proven Winner program. And Sugar Shack is one of his selections. So he was excited that it also made the gold medal list. And I know Tim from, he and I were actually interns together in 1984 at the Chicago Botanic Garden. So I know that he has spent a lot of time over his career really selecting shrubs for the Proven Winner program that are tried and true, that have actually gone through fairly rigorous plant evaluation and trials. So if he feels like Sugar Shack is a exceptional form of the native buttonbush, then I'm going to guess that, he saw attributes in this plants that were different or superior to the straight species.
I had to look up the term Sugar Shack to see where it came from, other than being, of course, in the Jimmy Gilmer and Fireball song of 1963, which was a song about a beatnik coffee shop. But a Sugar Shack, if you live in an area where you grow maple trees and you harvest the sap, the Sugar Shack is where you boil the 40 gallons of sap into 1 gallon of maple syrup.
Yeah, I thought it had a maple syrup reference. I wasn't exactly sure what it was, but now I know. Thank you.
Anytime. All right. Another plant on the 2024 PHS Gold Medal plant list is an iris, the Iris tectorum, a Japanese roof iris.
Yeah, so this is literally an iris that can grow on a roof. So there's a gardener. I live in a town, Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, which is southeastern PA, just south of Philadelphia. There's a famous liberal arts college there, Swarthmore College. But in the town, there's a nationally known gardener, Charles Cresson, and he has a little roof over his front porch, a little slate roof. And on his roof grows this iris. So it's an iris that can grow in essentially no soil. So either gravelly areas, rocky areas. It can grow in regular garden soils as well. But if you have a site where it's totally impoverished soil or soilless, like a roof, it can grow in those conditions. So it's kind of odd. You walk up to the front of his house and he has this little kind of outdoor porch and a roof, and growing on the roof is an iris, that grows 12 to 18 inches tall. Just kind of an oddity.
And I guess this too, because they're rhizomes, they can spread fairly easily. So it might be good for naturalizing. Yeah,
it makes a great, in the garden, it grows really well in areas where there's really heavy roots from shrubs and trees. So if there's, say a tree that has really dense, shallow roots, like a Norway maple or something like that, and you have difficulty growing some other ground covers, you might consider this because it can colonize in areas where there's essentially no soil. So it's really good for that. Yeah, but it like many other irises, it has these kind of fleshy rhizomes, and that's how it spreads as well. And it's also really easy to divide. So if you want to share it with someone else, you just kind of pop off a piece of the rhizome, and that's a good way to generate a new plant.
And supposedly, according to the PHS, it's hardy in zone 6 through 9, and some other sources would spread that out a little bit more to zones 4 through 9.
I think when I was at the Chicago Botanic Garden, we had Iris tectorum, and that's typically zone 5. There's parts of Chicago that maybe are zone 6, but I'd say mostly a solid zone 5.
All right. So it's an iris, the Iris tectorum, with beautiful showy flowers in shades of lavender, blue, blush violet, and blue lilac. So that sounds gorgeous.
Yeah, there's a white form too. Iris.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Album.
Yeah. I saw a nice picture of the white one. That is a nice one. All right. And finally, the Tiarella cordifolia brandywine, which is a foam flower.
Yeah, I love the foam flowers. It's one of my most favorite spring flowering plants. Tiarella cordifolia is an East Coast native, and brandywine, well, it's a clump-forming perennial with these little spikes of kind of white bottle brush flowers in, April, maybe into May. The leaves are kind of rounded, slightly scalloped, and have kind of red and bronzy tints in the fall. It can grow it's great for colonizing in shady spots. It can also take a little part sun as well. So it's a fairly versatile and long-lived perennial, whether you use it in the woodland garden or kind of an accent in a shade garden.
It sounds like it would pair well with a heuchera.
Yeah, it's actually, I think they're both Saxifragaceae. So it kind of looks like more like a smaller version of a heuchera. So yeah, it could pair well with a heuchera. I think it pairs well really with almost any fern, like a Christmas fern or maidenhair fern or New York fern. Like a fern next to this, because this has even though it's small, it still has bold foliage. So it really makes a nice juxtaposition against something finer in texture like a fern.
And it is herbaceous.
It is herbaceous. However, I have some tiarellas in my back garden, and the foliage really doesn't die back until the winter gets really, really cold. So I would say it's semi-evergreen, probably until Christmas at least.
Okay. And I noticed that the Missouri Botanical Garden states that it's adaptable from zones 4 through 9, which means it has a chance here in California in the shade.
Yeah. I would think as long as you give it, moisture during the summer, which I assume you probably have to do with lots of things anyways. Yeah, as long as you give it summer moisture, I think in probably most parts of California, again, probably northern Florida is okay, probably most of the southeastern U.S., and then it's fairly hardy. So, places like Chicago, Indianapolis, some of the Midwestern cities should not be a problem either.
Again, it's the Tiarella cordifolia, and it's a brandywine too. So it was developed there in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. So there was a nurseryman, Sinclair Adams, and he had a specialty nursery, Dunvegan Nursery, and he introduced other foam flowers, but he named this one Brandywine in honor of the Brandywine River, the Brandywine Valley. That's kind of Andrew Wyeth country, the famous painter, Jamie Wyeth. So, that's an important historical and geographic area near Philadelphia.
So there you go. You got a foam flower, an iris, a button bush, asparagus, a Florida anise tree, and a magnolia. That's 6 plants that are part of the 2024 Pennsylvania Horticultural Society Gold Medal plants. And again, we'll have links to information about these plants in today's show notes. And then in the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter that'll be out on Friday, along with this episode, we'll talk more about these gold medal plants. Andrew Bunting has been our guest. He is the Vice President of Horticulture for the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society. You can certainly visit their website if you would like. He would enjoy that. phsonline.org, where I imagine you will have, I bet you already have information posted about the next Philadelphia Flower Show.
Yep. So, we're already planning for the next one in 2025. So I believe it's going to be March 1st through the 9th, 2025.
Always a pleasure talking with you, Andrew. Best of luck, and we'll do it again.
Great. Thanks for having me.
I'm I'm pretty picky about who I allow to advertise on this podcast. My criteria, though, is pretty simple. It has to be a product I like, a product I use, and a product I would buy again. And you know who checks all those boxes? It's Smart Pots. Smart Pots is the oldest and still the best of all the fabric plant containers that you might find. Smart Pots are sold around the world, and they're proudly made 100% right here in the USA. Smart Pots come in a wide array of sizes and colors and can be reused year after year. Some models even have handles, and that makes them a lot easier to move around the yard. Because the fabric breathes, Smart Pots are better suited than plastic pots, especially for hot climates. That breathable fabric has other benefits too. Water drainage issues? Not with Smart Pots. Roots that go round and round choking the root ball like they do in plastic pots? Doesn't happen with Smart Pots. These benefits will help you get a bigger, better plant than what you've gotten in the past with the same size plastic or other hard container. Smart Pots are available at independent garden centers as well as select Ace and True Value hardware stores nationwide. To find a store near you or to buy online, visit smartpots.com/Fred. And don't forget that /Fred part. On that page are details about how, for a limited time, you can get 10% off your Smart Pot order by using the coupon code FRED. F-R-E-D. Use it at checkout from the Smart Pot store. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pots lightweight, colorful, award-winning fabric containers. And don't forget that special Farmer Fred 10% discount. Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. Currently here in USDA Zone 9 and soon appearing at a USDA zone near you, it'll be time for fruit tree thinning. Why is that important? The late Sacramento County Farm Advisor and all-around good guy Chuck Engels wrote a very complete report about why thinning young fruit is so important. Fruit trees, after all, set more fruit than they can support or develop adequately, especially if the trees were not properly pruned during the previous season. That excessive fruit compete with each other for carbohydrates and stored energy and remain small. This carbohydrate drain, or a sink as it's sometimes called, can also weaken the tree and make it more susceptible to pest and sunburn damage. Leaving too much fruit on a tree can also lead to alternate bearing, and that's a cycle in which the tree bears excessively in one year and then little or none the following year, and it can also lead to limb breakage. Thinning the fruit helps prevent these problems from developing, and the time to do it is when the fruit is really small, like less than an inch across. Thinning immature fruit at the appropriate time allows each remaining fruit to develop to its maximum size with little reduction of tree vigor. Less crowded fruit receives more sunlight, so you get more fruit color and more flavor. Fruit thinning also reduces alternate bearing. Reducing the fruit load through proper pruning and fruit thinning, especially near the ends of the branches, lessens the chances of limb breakage. And to make thinning fruit easier, if you prune the trees to begin with to keep them small and lower to the ground, it eases the process. As we're fond of saying here, try to keep your fruit trees about 7 feet tall or no taller than you can reach without standing on a ladder. Any fruit above that, it's for the birds. Fruit thinning can also help reduce the spread of some diseases. For example, if the fruit are touching each other, brown rot can quickly spread from one fruit to another just before harvest. Air movement around tightly clustered fruit is minimal, so the surface of unthinned fruit doesn't dry quickly, allowing disease organisms to multiply and spread. Now, you may see some fruit falling to the ground. Well, that's fairly natural. Flowers and fruits naturally thin themselves, often at distinct time periods. Blossoms that were not pollinated turn yellow and drop off just after flowering. Small, immature fruits often drop naturally here in California during what is known as June drop, which usually occurs in May in the Golden State. Fruits that are diseased or infested with insects, such as apples or pears, which can be infested with codling moth as well, may drop prematurely. In some types of trees, that natural thinning is sufficient. Other species need additional thinning to produce high-quality fruit. Cherries, figs, persimmons, pomegranates, citrus, and nut trees do not usually require thinning. However, the branches of persimmon trees can break from the weight of a heavy crop and may benefit from some fruit thinning or branch propping. And I found in my own experience, it pays to go in there and thin your persimmon trees, your fuyu persimmons, because they can get loaded with fruit, causing those branches to drop precipitously and may break. All stone fruits, peaches, apricots, nectarines, cherries, plums, require thinning. Of the pome fruits, all apples and Asian pears, as well as most European pears, require thinning. Bartlett pears often thin themselves, and harvesting larger fruit early, usually late June, early July, allows the smaller fruit to increase in size for a second pick 1 to 2 weeks later. Fruit should be thinned when they're fairly small, typically here in California from early April for early ripening fruit to mid-May for late ripening fruit. It may be later in your area. So what do you look for? Stone fruits are thinned when they are about 3/4 to 1 inch across. Pome fruits, the apples and pears, are thinned at even smaller, 1/2 to 1 inch, or within about 30 to 45 days after full bloom. Thinning too early can result in split pits in stone fruits, especially peaches, but thinning too late, that reduces the chances that fruit size will increase. So how much fruit do you take off? The amount of fruit to thin depends on the species and the overall fruit load on the tree. For example, stone fruits such as apricots and plums are fairly small, so they should be thinned to be about 2 to 4 inches apart on the branch. Peaches and nectarines should be thinned as well to about 3 to 5 inches apart. If spring conditions for pollination were ideal, excessive fruit may have been set, requiring even more thinning. Unlike stone fruits, which produce about 1 fruit per bud, the pome fruits, that's apples and pears, produce a cluster of flowers, and fruit can spring from each bud. Thin to no more than 1 to 2 fruit per cluster, depending on the total fruit set and growing conditions. So which ones do you choose? Well, keep the largest fruit whenever possible. When the crop is heavy, fruit should be spaced no less than 6 to 8 inches apart. There are 2 main ways to thin, by hand or by pull. Thinning by hand is more thorough and more accurate than the pull method, but obviously it is much slower. So again, watch your fruit trees, especially after flowering. When you see that tiny fruit start to develop, get set to thin your deciduous stone fruit trees. We'll have the full report on thinning young fruit trees, written by Chuck Engels, in today's show notes. The Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast has a lot of information posted at each episode in the show notes. Maybe you'd rather read it than listen to it. That's not a problem. We have a complete transcript posted, and you can find that link in the show notes or on our new homepage, gardenbasics.net. That's where you can find that link, as well as all the previous episodes of the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. There you can leave a message or link up with our social media pages, including our YouTube video page. And at gardenbasics.net, click on the tab at the top of the page to read the Garden Basics Beyond Basics newsletter. Plus, in the show notes, there are links to any products or books mentioned during the show and other helpful links for even more information. Want to leave us a question? Again, check the links at gardenbasics.net. And when you click on any episode at gardenbasics.net, you're going to find a link to SpeakPipe, where you can leave us an audio question without making a phone call. Or go to them directly, speakpipe.com/gardenbasics. You want to call us? We have that number posted at gardenbasics.net. Spoiler alert, it's 916-292-8964, 916-292-8964. Email? Sure, send it along with your pictures to fred@farmerfred.com. Or again, go to gardenbasics.net to get that link. And if you send us a question, be sure to tell us where you're gardening, because, as I am fond of saying, all gardening is local. Find it all at gardenbasics.net. Garden Basics with Farmer Fred comes out every Tuesday and Friday, and it's brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Garden Basics, it's available wherever podcasts are handed out. For more information about the podcast, visit our website, gardenbasics.net, and that's where you can find out about the free Garden Basics newsletter, Beyond the Basics. And thank you so much for listening.